This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 501, Why Sellers Need to Recognize the Elephant in the Room.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. And before I get started, I just want to take a pause and thank you. I had a number of people reach out to me last week because of our 500th anniversary. I really appreciate it, and it's great to know that I've been able to help many people like you grow their selling skills. I'm so grateful for the support and to know for certain that this podcast is making a positive impact. Thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing what we do. Now, have you ever skirted the truth when talking to a prospect? Have you ever redirected the conversation to put your offerings in the best light? Have you ever wondered why a prospect stops taking your calls when at first you thought everything was going well? Well, maybe the prospects saw through your avoidance. Maybe they sensed there was something wrong with your product or service. Maybe you lost their trust. In this week's episode, we talk about the elephant in the room, those big issues that salespeople are afraid to bring up with hopes that they will just go away. But they don't. But before we get to today's chapter, make sure and subscribe to the podcast. That way, you'll never miss an episode. And so, with no further ado, let's get to it. And now for today's chapter. At first scent of objection, the fool avoids it. Deluding themselves, the deal is won. Like rotten wood covered with new paint, the sale soon crumbles when bearing weight. Better to shine a bright light on issues, addressing them as best able, accepting the truth for what it is. A destination can be reached by more than one path. Seek the truth and let the sale be. Now today's story. During the sales call, the buyer had a long list of questions to ask Chris. One inquiry was particularly vexing. It concerned a service Chris's company didn't provide. It was all Chris could do to avoid answering the question with honesty. Back at the office, Chris was certain the deal was dead and asked Pat how to avoid the situation. Pat answered, "When you get into these situations, it's best to deal with them head on. Ask if the service is important to their business and how come. Most times you're going to find the buyer is just curious. The product gap isn't a deal breaker. It's low on their list. But sometimes it is important, and it's important to learn that now." Pat went on. Redirecting and avoiding the question does no one any good. After reflecting on your non-answer, the buyer may lose trust and ghost you. You don't need that frustration. Always deal with the elephant in the room. If you don't, it will be near impossible to restart the conversation. Professor Randy Pausch of Carnegie Mellon famously said, "If there's an elephant in the room, introduce him." Too often, sellers avoid addressing gaps in their solution with the hope that buyers won't notice. You can't avoid an objection by avoiding the conversation. Sooner or later, the truth comes out, and sooner is always better than later. There's an old Zen story about a student who asked the master, "What is the most important teaching of Zen?" The master replied, "Whatever is needed at the moment." Once you understand your prospect's needs in the moment, You'll know if you can help. The best way to know what they need is to ask completely and fully, and especially recognize those elephants in the room. Now, to download a copy of this week's chapter of the Tao of Sales Babble, you can find it in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a brief weekly newsletter with links to the podcast sent conveniently to your inbox. Next, if you could do me a favor and share this episode with a friend who's also interested in growing their selling skills, maybe somebody at work, please do. Word of mouth is the premier way of growing our sales community. Next, if you have a question about sales, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn or click the Babble Me link on the website. I'd be more than happy. If you have any questions about sales, don't hesitate to reach out. Find me on LinkedIn or click the Babble Me link on the website. Sales is one of my favorite topics. I can help you out. With that said, that's all I have for this week. Until next Tuesday, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.